Welcome everybody. My name's Paul, Director of Product Development here, and we have Gary, our RF applications specialist, or engineer, or guru, as I like to call him. Good morning, Gary.
Good morning.
Yeah, and thanks to all of you for attending this. No, we didn't give too much notice about this, but we're very excited here at Sound Devices to be able to talk about our new A20-Nexus, which started shipping 2 days ago, and we announced it on Monday. This has been a very exciting product development for us. Been working on it for a long time, and the aim of the A20-Nexus multi-channel receiver was to really lift the bar on what's possible with multi-channel audio. So without further ado, we're going to get into this. Let me just give you a little bit of a quick overview of what the A20-Nexus is. It's a 8 to 16 channel true diversity digital wireless system that fits in the space of a half rack 1U space, which is really a game changer. I mean, to have that number of channels in such a small space is really unheard of. I mean, typically you'd need to take up about 4 to 6 U of space to have that sort of capability in a rack, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, it's a typical 4 or 5 RU to get that number of channels at least, and sometimes more.
As it's purchased as standard, it comes as an 8-channel system, but you can purchase what we call +4 plugins, which add an additional 4 channels with each +4. So you can take the unit from 8 to 12 if you need a few more channels, but you can then add another +4 to take it up to 16. So it's your choice. That gives you the great flexibility. You may only need 8 channels now for the type of work you do, but as your business or your productions become more complex, you may need to add more channels in the future. So you can do that very easily. Now, this is a true diversity system. So what that means is, and Gary, why don't you just cover the basis of true diversity in the Nexus and what that means?
Sure. So when we talk about true diversity, we really just mean that it's got 2 full receiver paths for a given audio channel. So there's an A antenna and a B antenna. Those antenna signals are going to come in, we're going to filter them, we're going to decode the audio, and then we're actually going to compare the audio from the A antenna and B antenna to decide which one has the best reception. And so we can do that on almost a packet by packet or bit by bit level to say which antenna has the better signal. And so it gives you the most robust performance from the system because you're always comparing these 2 audio streams and deciding which one is the best.
So the bottom line of that is the true diversity gives much more robust range. And you know, it's really what is required for the most solid performance and the best range. And we feel with our A20 system that it does offer the best range on the market, especially with regards to digital wireless. Now, just to go back a little bit, the A20-Nexus is actually part of a platform, call it an ecosystem of wireless technology, which comes under the banner of the A20 platform, but we've actually got a name, a bit more of a descriptive name, which we've just introduced for this platform, and it's called the Astral series. So yeah, well, the products that can make up this Astral series right now are the A20-Nexus. We have the A20 mini transmitters, which came out over a year ago, which are part of this platform. And we also have the dual true diversity receiver, the A20RX, which also came out about 6 months ago. Now, one thing that is, let's talk about some of the common technology behind the Astral series products. And one of the key ones here is what we call SpectraBand. And we've already brought this up before, but what's unique, what SpectraBand offers is the widest tuning range of any digital or any wireless system on the market. So we're talking about 470 megahertz all the way up to 1,525 megahertz. That's over 1 gigahertz of tuning range. What that means is it gives you this flexibility to use this system anywhere in the world. You're always going to be able to find some clean spectrum, clean legal or licensed spectrum anywhere in the world. And you can do this with just the one SKU. You don't have to buy different SKUs or models of the same product to cover different frequency blocks as you have had to do with other manufacturers' products. So it's one receiver system and one transmitter that could cover that whole range. Gary, let's talk about some of the other advantages of SpectraBand.
Sure. I mean, I think that you're talking about the filtering, and that's really a key component here. We're using SAW filters on really the three different filter banks that happen within the receiver chain. And a SAW filter is a surface acoustic wave filter. It offers you a very, very steep roll-off outside of its passband. So you have a defined passband, which is the area of RF that you're receiving. And then you've got anything outside of that. And if we can roll that off, we can essentially attenuate out-of-band signals, any interfering signals, very strongly. So this could be something like a local DTV transmission, or maybe you've got a IFB or a camera hop that you're using. Maybe you've got two-way radios on set, like any of these things that could otherwise interfere with your wireless. We're able to filter that out very strongly. And we'll talk a little bit more about tuning bands with the A20-Nexus a little bit later. And that's something to think about, is the reason that there are these defined tuning bands is because of this very significant RF filtering that we're putting on the front of the antennas.
Yeah, I'm just actually wondering if we should bring up that plot now, Gary. What do you think?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because I mean, when we're saying filtering here, we are looking at the tightest filtering of any receiver there on the market. And this plot that Gary is going to show you right now shows how it compares to other.
Yeah, this would be a more traditional filter. So the SAW filter is shown on this graph in yellow. And so you can see the pass band on the top, and then you can see how much roll off you have on the filter. And each grid line on here is going to be 10 dB worth of attenuation. And then the green trace here is a filter with the same passband, but with a more traditional LC construction, not a SAW filter, but something made of inductors and capacitors. And then the blue filter on here is just a different LC filter with a little wider passband, but also a different roll off, and just sort of shows you the difference between the different RF filtering. And so when we talk about being able to get closer to these tuning bands with a strong interfering signal and still have it not affect the performance of the Nexus, this is kind of one of the main things we're talking about.
Okay, well, let's move back to some of the other common key technologies behind the A20 or the Astral system. Another technology we introduced over a year ago now is the gain forward technology. And basically what this means is you no longer have to worry about adjusting the gain on your actual transmitter. All the gain control can be at your receiver or the mixer recorder that you're using. And this is made possible by virtue of the fact that the transmitter has such a wide dynamic range, over 130 dBs of dynamic range, which exceeds the dynamic range of a lav with the greatest dynamic range out there, which is typically 110 to 115 dB. But the dynamic range of the A20 mini transmitter, for instance, is 130 dB. So we transmit that entire dynamic range to the receiver, and then that signal can be digitally connected to your recorder via Dante or AS and what have you, and then you can adjust the trim gain directly on your receiver without having to worry about any clipping or extra noise coming through, because the noise floor of the transmitter is so low and it's got such high headroom. You never need to worry about clipping the actual transmitter. You're going to clip the lapel lav mic first before you ever get near clipping the actual transmitter itself. So you can think of really going forward as, in terms of practicality, it's just like plugging in a wired mic into your mixer recorder. You're just adjusting the trim at that point there. So that's the gain forward technology.
Yeah, and one thing we talk to users about quite a bit is the first place where you adjust your gain, where is that? Well, if you're using an analog output from your receiver, you can adjust the gain at the receiver. But if you're coming out of the receiver with a digital signal, let's say AES or maybe a Dante connection with the Nexus, then you can send that full digital signal all the way to your mixer. And so then the trim on your mixer is going to be the first place where you're going to adjust the gain.
Yeah, that's right. And this, it's not necessary to have an 8 series recorder mixer to get the benefits of gain forward. You can use any mixer.
That's right. We did have one question that came in just related to the Astral series. And so Astral is just our marketing name for our full line of wireless product. But the question was related to an A10 upgrading to an A20. Would it be considered Astral series? Certainly A20RX is part of this Astral wireless series. And the A20RX is something we introduced a few months back. We were offering an upgrade path from the A10RX to an A20RX. You can send that in and we can do a board swap and get you to A20. And the big advantage to the A20RX components is that RF front end we talked about. It's going to have the wider SpectraBand tuning and it's going to have those tighter soft filters.
Right. One thing we should probably just quickly mention is that we introduced an additional modulation scheme quite a few months ago, long range it's called, which is supported on all the Astral series products, the A20 Mini, the A20RX and the A20-Nexus. But actually that is also supported in the original A10TX transmitter too. Although the A10TX is not part of the Astral series, that still benefits from the long range modulation scheme, which has proven to be very, very good range in the real world and many people using it now. In fact, we say that should be the default modulation scheme used. We still offer the standard modulation scheme in all our products, but the long range really does give you that great performance. Yeah. And that's still latency. The only trade-off there is there's a couple of extra milliseconds of latency, but it's still very low. So standard modulation is 2 milliseconds and the long range modulation is 3.9 milliseconds.
Yeah, I was going to say standard prioritizes latency, but if you can deal with that 3.9 milliseconds of latency, long range seems to be the most commonly used. And with our different receivers, including the Nexus, you can change that modulation setting on a per channel basis. So you could mix and match if you needed to, given your particular requirements.
Right. And we can show how to do that in a minute. But yeah, and what we're finding with long range modulation is that 2 milliwatts is often good enough for many applications. 10 milliwatts will cover 95% of applications. And if you really are in extreme situations, taking it up to 20 milliwatts of RF power really does get you really penetrate even further. We do have a 40 milliwatt setting, but really we haven't seen any need for using that in the real world at this time. Okay, so the big thing, the key new technology, apart from the multi-channel 16-channel support in a half-rack 1U space with the A20-Nexus receiver, it's also introduced a transmitter control protocol, which we call NexLink. It's our own proprietary 2.4 gigahertz remote control technology, which we spent a long time developing. And the main design remit behind this remote control capability, we wanted to be able to allow the Nexus, the user at the Nexus receiver, to be able to control their transmitters, change their frequency, their RF power, their mute, turn them on and off remotely. But the key thing was we wanted to be able to do it over a very long range. In fact, a distance far exceeding the forward wireless audio transmission link. And we've achieved that with NexLink, even in a very congested 2.4 gigahertz environment, because we know that Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is everywhere. Gary, do you want to explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. So yeah, NexLink, as you said, is our proprietary 2.4 gig control link. It's a control link between the Nexus and the A20 Mini. And you can expect that to be a control link for, our wireless portfolio going forward. We're really emphasizing the range on this. And what we've done to achieve that long range is we've reduce the data rate because you're really only sending on-off commands, frequency change commands, you're sending time code information. And so for those sort of small bits of data, you can send that on a slower data link that has a much greater sensitivity and a much longer range than, let's say, a Bluetooth transmission, which is concerned with being able to stream audio or something that's a higher data rate application. And so, and also writing it ourselves, we can prioritize things like time code and making sure everything's in sync. And so it's been an interesting development. And then one thing that's, I think, harder than some folks might expect is that we were able to do Bluetooth and NextLink at the same time, which is pretty impressive. So that 2.4 gigahertz radio in the A20 Mini can still be connected to your phone or your tablet on iOS or Android running the A20 remote app, and at the same time be NextLinked to an A20-Nexus receiver and sending data back and forth to the receiver. You're going to link up your A20 Mini transmitter to a single Nexus receiver. That's a pairing function that's done with USB cable at first. And once that pairing is done, you won't need to do it unless you unpair and maybe pair it with a different Nexus receiver.
Right. Yeah, so from Nexus, you can control up to 16 transmitters independently, and makes it a very versatile system. Okay, I think at this point, we've given a good introduction here, and there's some really nice new features, but I think they're more powerful to describe by actually visualizing them in the flesh in real time. So I think at this point, why don't we take a look at some of the panels here?
Sure.
I'll bring up my camera here, Gary, if that's all right with you.
Sounds great.
And okay, I'm just going to switch here to here. Okay, hope you can all see that. Gary, can you see that?
Looks good to me.
Right, so on the bottom there, you see the Nexus front panel, and I've got another Nexus sitting on top, which shows the rear panel. So let's talk first about the front panel here. When you power it on, you can see that we've got these like 4 OLED screen interface there. It's a touch screen interface. And basically these 4 OLED screens essentially operate as one screen. And it's very versatile. They're protected by Gorilla Glass, so very robust. We do offer like well, we don't actually offer, but there are third parties out there that offer the screen protectors. It's actually the same size as a 44mm Apple Watch screen protector, so you can get them sort of from anywhere like Amazon, etc. So yeah, very robust screen, touch screen, as I've said, and it's very easy to navigate by virtue of the touch screens. There are obviously few controls on the front here, but you can see we've got our antenna A, B, and C, antenna B, and C on the front here. There's also B and C's on the back, but we'll talk more about that soon. We have a headphone output here for monitoring the channels as in a group, or you can solo individual receive channels. And then you've got this navigation triangle button here, which you can do various things with, and also a headphone volume control here. And it's also got a press function and a rotate function, which allows you to set parameters and navigate menus too. But it's really easy to navigate. For instance, right here, I'm looking at 8 channels, 2 channels per screen. And you can see various RF status information in the screen. You can see the RSSI, you can see the Q meter, which is like a very useful indication of signal to noise for the RS signal, really. And you see an audio meter bouncing up and down. You can see the name of the transmitter. You can see the transmitter battery life. You can see the NextLink signal strength, and also the frequency you're operating on. But if you want to zoom in a little bit more, you can easily just tap 2 screens. Whoops, let's just come back out. Go to 4 screen view if I want to. I can bank along. And so it's very easy to see different groups of receive transmitter pairs. And, you know, if you really want to go really into detail on a channel, you can just tap that screen and you're in. And now you get the full control and status monitoring of that particular transmitter. And from here, you can do all sorts of things like change your frequency by touching that.
Hey, Paul,
Yeah.
If I can interrupt you for just 1 second, we've had a couple of questions come in asking if you can go full screen. We've checked with some other participants who said that it is full screen for them. So you may just need to change your view options on your Zoom client to be able to see Paul's video full screen.
Okay, so it's not an issue my end, it's client side, is it?
Yeah, I think you need to pin if they want to see just your video where you're doing the demo, you need
how
to
about that? Does that help?
You need to pin that video. No, your video is sending fine. It's an option on the for the folks who are viewing the webinar.
How about that?
I think we're okay.
Is that okay?
Yep. It looks good for me. Yep.
All right. So yeah, just so from here you can see that you in this what we call the one RX view, because you're looking at one channel and you're really honing in on the detail of that channel. This view is not only setting your receiver, but it's also setting transmitter parameters that for the transmitter that is next linked paired to this channel. We can talk more about pairing shortly, but you can see you can do things like setting your frequency. You can do things like pair with different transmitters here. You can turn transmitter on and off. You can mute transmitters, ID transmitters, and various things from here. You can adjust RF power of the transmitter, change your modulation scheme. This is where you can set either long range or standard range, RF power. You can set the gain of the audio, various parameters here. But you can also see the transmitter peak here that's being received by this receiver channel. So you can really assess the quality of the actual signal that's being received. And you can see a nice clean shape on the peak of that transmitter signal, which is what you want to see. And if you are running into problems, you could use this as a tool for determining if there's any interference on that signal. But if I touch that screen, I actually can now navigate directly to a full RTSA. And this is a very unique feature in a receiver-based system like this. So the RTSA, that stands for Real-Time Spectrum Analyzer. And you can basically view the spectrum of the tuning band that you're operating in real time while still decoding and demodulating 16 channels of audio. Gary, why don't you talk us through a little bit of this screen?
Sure. Real quick, first, we've got a couple people who are attendees who are raising their hand to ask a question. If you've got a question, please go ahead and just type that in the Q&A, and we'll answer the Q&A questions as they come in. The question in the Q&A right now related to our discussion of NextLink previously is, will NextLink be able to wake up the A20 mini transmitter if it's been turned off from the A20 remote app using Bluetooth?
Yes.
And yes, it absolutely will. There's a certain amount of time after several hours where it times out, and you would need to power it back on either with the red power button or with Bluetooth, BLE connectivity, because the BLE is the lowest power consumption that stays on for a very long time. But for normal few hours after you've turned it off from the app, you'll still have an active NextLink connection, and you'd still be able to wake it up.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, talking about the RTSA, I mean, we've got a real-time spectrum analyzer. So we spoke a bit before about the 24 megahertz tuning bands. As Paul was running you through this, you're going to do a scan. You're going to select a tuning band based on your local RF environment.
Actually, should we do that sort of, Gary?
Sure. Yeah. Let's do the scan and pick a tuning band, and then go in and talk a little bit about real time.
Yeah, typical workflows. You arrive on set in the morning. You want to sort of look at the RF environment. So you can actually do a scan. Now, the difference between a scan and the RTSA is the RTSA, as we've already said, is fully real time. What you're seeing is what you get. A scan is really a snapshot at a moment in time of the RF environment. So which is very useful. And we've had that sort of feature in our super slot based gear, with a scan function before. The only disadvantage of a scan is it's not giving you real-time information. So if something changes, you're not going to know about it. I mean, it gives you a good feeling for what's going on generally in an RF environment, but it's not going to let you know if something suddenly changes or some walkie-talkies have come into the environment and are now pushing RF everywhere, or whatever it is, whatever random thing it could be. So the scan, let's just, is, I would call it almost like pseudo real time on the Nexus, which is still really good. If I just click here, and we should note here that when you are in scan mode, which is something you're pretty much going to do just at the beginning of the day, all audio is disabled. So this is something you do at the beginning of the day before you set up. But here you can see that the scan is still being updated pretty regularly. It's about twice a second or so. So that's why I call it pseudo real time, but it allows you to look at a far wider portion of the tuning range of Nexus. You can actually look at the full gigahertz tuning range of Nexus. But what you do is you look at, currently we're looking at, you can see from 470 to 616 here, and I can sort of zoom into that. I can bank to the next 148, 146 dB hertz of range, megahertz of range. So I can just show you that quickly by just tapping there. And you can see we've just moved up. And now we can tap back. You can see there. So now you can see this blue marker just here. And you can just tap anywhere in the screens to move it. And if you want to fine tune its position, you can use the headphone knob on the right-hand side. But when you have found a clean bit of spectrum, it's very easy to see here what's clean. Like for instance, here we can see lots of DTV here. So probably not going to go and use that tuning band right now. But this one here looks quite nice. So I could come in here and you can see that there's this blue band at the bottom that tells you that that's its own dedicated tuning band. And because the marker is located directly over that, if I press this knob here, it will take me directly into that tuning band. Now I'm in the tuning band. This has become like it's switched to the real-time RTSA for that band. Okay. You can also switch tuning bands directly from here. And again, when you switch tuning bands, you disable audio very briefly. So if I click there, it now brings up a list of all our tuning bands. As I switch through, you can see the tuning band changing in real time. And then you can see like various transmitters. They're sort of obviously located around our office. But as you can see, I can just switch and it very, very quickly switches to the new tuning band in real time. And then when you've selected a tuning band, you can just press the knob and you're in. Gary, you take over for a bit, talk about more some of the details on this RTSA.
Sure. So you've selected a tuning band. And so that is a 24 megahertz chunk of spectrum that you've decided this is the clean spectrum I want to operate my wireless mics in. So that this aids you in band planning, saying, hey, this is where my wireless mics are going to be. And if I have something else I'm setting up like an IFB or camera hop transmitter, then put that outside of the tuning band. We're recommending that you place it about 12 meg outside the tuning band if you can. That allows you to get far enough outside the filter where you get good rejection. As you can see from Paul's display here, you can zoom in and out. He's got the three different transmitters that he's using are colored in orange. If you see them orange on this display, what that means is that that's a receiver that you've programmed from this Nexus. So if you'd see something in there that was just in green, that's a nearby signal. You can see on his first screen, that's a DTV channel here because it's a very wide, 6 meg DTV range. And yeah, he's showing you how you can go in between the various channels. You can just tap on them from the spectrum analyzer and get into the single channel view, tap on the spectrum analyzer screen and go back to the overall real-time spectrum analyzer showing you that 24 meg tuning band. I think the really powerful thing here is this is all happening at the same time that you're decoding audio. So you could have up to 16 channels of audio coming in and sending that out to your mixer recorder while you're looking at the spectrum. And so I think it's a great thing for users to have this sort of visibility into what's going on in their local environment. Certainly the other receivers that I'm used to using, you would have to stop and do a scan, and the scan can be, depending on the receiver you're using, the scan can be kind of slow. It could take several seconds. to go through the entire band, and you're only going to see a signal that happened to be there while the scan was going by. And so now with this real-time spectrum analyzer, any brief interfering signal, if you're looking at the spectrum analyzer display, you can see it, and you've got the ability to change here to a peak hold function if you want to show them peak hold, Paul, where this then will actually grab, if you have intermittent signals, if you leave this on peak hold and you had another signal that just popped in briefly, it would be persistent on this display. You could do some real detailed RF troubleshooting if you needed to. I'll get to a couple of questions that are coming in as well. One question just about, can I buy this equipment in my country? And so you want to check the website, sounddevices.com. We've got a list of all our resellers there. If there's not a reseller listed for your country, please reach out to us at sales@sounddevices.com. Just send us an email to sales@sounddevices.com and we can help you out with that. There's another question here is it possible to save global presets? And if so, how many? So yeah, we'll absolutely get to that. There is a function for quick settings here.
Yeah, we'll go there now, Gary. It's very
Sure.
easy to show. So this is the main menu screen you're looking at right now. And you can see there's various icons for the different aspects of the product, almost consider them as independent apps within the Nexus. And there's a menu here called Quick Setup. Just tap on that and you can save setups. You can save there's 4 internal memory slots, but you can save as many setups as you like to a USB drive, which you would plug into the USB-A port on the rear of the Nexus there. So yeah, you can very easily save setups and then you can load them. The nice thing about the quick setups here is when you load a setup, you can choose to load only individual categories. You don't have to do a global recall of settings. You can, for instance, just reload the network settings or the RF settings, the scan settings. So it gives you some real flexibility there. Okay, back to the RTSA. Should we demonstrate the assigning frequencies here, Gary? Might be a good worth doing.
Sure. Yeah. So let's do that. And then we do have some more questions coming in. So we'll just keep working through those. But real briefly, you can see where Paul has the blue cursor there, and it's right now on the far left-hand screen and within that DTV channel. But let's say he had some interference on his channel number 1, and he wanted to move it further away from that DTV station. He can just tap and it moves the cursor to wherever he wants to move his frequency to. He could turn the encoder a little bit if he said, I want to just tweak it a little bit one way or the other. And then once he lands on the frequency he wants, just tap in to select it and then say, okay, I want to move transmitter number 1 there. And he taps again, and you'll see the carrier go away at the old frequency and just come back up with a new frequency. And so that's the receiver is changing the frequency, and then the A20 Mini is just following along because the next link is telling it, hey, we've got a frequency change on the receiver. There are settings to do it different ways. So in this case, we've got it set up to where we're telling the A20 Mini transmitter to stay in sync with the receiver. If you wanted to do it the other way around, you could. Let's say you've got somebody that's changing settings using the app, the A20 remote app, and you want the Nexus to follow that. You could do it that way as well. Or you could have it completely manual if you have some reason that you don't ever want these two things to stay in sync. But I think most people are going to probably tell the transmitter to stay in sync with the Nexus receiver, because that NextLink remote control is so robust and so long range that you really are just going to change all the settings on your receiver and just have the transmitter follow those settings. So getting through a few of the questions here. Yeah, time code, we'll definitely go through time code. Can you use the Nexus with a mix of A10, A20 transmitters, or you'll be forced to only work in the band of the A10 transmitters? So that's a good question. Obviously, the A10 transmitters are a narrower tuning range than the SpectraBand tuning. So if you're using A10 transmitters, you're going to want to select a tuning band that is matching the tuning range of your A10 transmitters. And then you can obviously put your A20 minis there as well, because the A20 mini covers all of the tuning range of any of the A10 transmitters. So the question about our frequencies, part of the settings you can choose to save when Paul was going through the settings. Yes, absolutely. It saves all of the frequencies in there. And that was one of the selective recall options. So if you just want to recall settings, when you save settings, it's sort of a global snapshot. And then when you recall it, you can decide to only recall certain portions of that global snapshot. We've got another question about auto frequency assign. That's something that we've said is coming in a future update. It's not an initial release, but we know we have auto assign on the A20-RX, and we're going to have a similar auto assign function on the Nexus coming.
And the advantage here is it auto assign to receiver channels, but also push those frequencies directly to the transmitters. Actually, why don't we show how you can switch tuning bands and basically store the settings for each transmitter RX pair between tuning bands, which is a really good, useful feature for having like a redundant backup tuning band already pre-prepared should there be any unpredictable interference on the primary tuning band you're working in. So currently we're in this tuning band 512 to 536, and you can see my 3 transmitters mapped there to certain frequencies and all working. Now, if I tap on tuning band here, I can bring up my list and let's say go to the next one along here, which is 536 to 560. And we come in here, let's just say place a transmitter just here. So I'm going to map my transmitter 1 to RX1 there. And there you can see its peak come up, and let's just do the same with, just use the headphone knob there to spin it into a more precise location. There's 2, and let's just do 1 here as well. All right, so we'll map that to 3. Okay, so I've set those up. And maybe I realize, actually, no, I want to be in the other tuning band. Oh God, am I going to have to go back to the other tuning band now and reassign all those? Well, no, because watch what happens when I go back to that previous tuning band. Select that, and it automatically recalls and pushes the frequencies back out to those transmitters instantly. So I can switch very rapidly between those tuning bands, which I think is a great feature for backup and redundancy. Got any comments on that, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, I think the initial idea here was that we were going to use this for just, I accidentally changed tuning bands, but you're talking through a different workflow with that, where, hey, maybe I want to set up 2 different tuning bands and move back and forth quickly without having to go through and recall setups. So both of those work. We have got some more comments in just about the view on here, how the cameras are switching. When I'm speaking, it's on my camera, and when Paul's speaking, it's on his. So for people that aren't able to pin Paul's video, depending on where you're viewing the webinar, when I talk about the features, I'll use my demo setup next time. I'll switch my camera. I've got a demo setup here, so sorry about that you're not able to see Paul's setup while I'm talking. I
think you can right click on the video and there's a pin option there typically.
Yeah, I think it depends. If say you're watching on iOS, you might not have all the same options as you do on a desktop.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I think we should move on from the RTSA right now. We can answer more questions about that, but I'd like to sort of focus a little bit on the back panel now, because it's been sitting there quietly. So let's walk through this from left to right. Gary, I'll let you speak for a little bit here.
Sure.
Let's start from the left-hand side just here.
Yeah, if I'm going to talk, then I've got to have the demo set up on my end. So since you've got the back panel on yours, why don't you speak? Okay,
so here we go. The back panel here. Now these are the 2 additional BNC ports that we were talking about just before. You can basically set your Nexus to either use the rear or the front antenna ports, and you can do that from the RF menu just here. Tap RF, and you can select front or rear here. And when you are all antenna ports basically provide bias power should you have an active antenna, and we also support smart antennas, specifically the Wisicom LFA and BFA. So if you do have one of those connected, you can go into the antennas gear menu here and enable the smart antenna, set that to enabled, also set the bias power to on, and then all of these parameters, LFA parameters, will be ungraded, and you'll be able to change the settings on your WYSICOM antenna, which is really nice to be able to do that remotely too. Going back here. So, yeah, when you're set to front antennas, these rear antenna ports, BNC ports, can be set to cascade out. And that's pre-filters. That's correct, isn't it, Gary?
Yeah, that's right.
So
and like when you set up to cascade, it's a passive split. So there's going to be 3.5 dB worth of loss, but you're going to pass the entire range through. Whatever your antenna that you're using is able to receive, that'll pass through to the cascade out.
Yeah, you can see that when I set my two front antennas, the cascade out option is ungraded. Now I can set that to on if necessary. Okay. So moving along, we have two D sub 25 outputs here, which support either analog, mic or line level, or -10 level, and AES out. And these can be configured in the audio output menu here. You see here two menus, the top D sub output menu and the bottom D sub. So for instance, I can have my receiver channels go out as analog line level or mic or AES level. I can also configure these D sub outputs to output incoming Dante. We haven't spoken about Dante at all yet. In fact, I'm going to get into that very shortly, but you can actually bring 16 channels of Dante audio into Nexus and then convert that to analog or AES out. So if you're wanting to drive IFB or camera hops from or comms and control it from your mixer, but sort of connect it at the Nexus, you can.
All right, Paul, I'm going to do a couple of quick Q&A answers here. One question with the smart antennas was, can you adjust them over Dante? Kind of. We'll talk a little bit about the web app later, but there's a web app where you can control all of these front panel functions that Paul is showing you remotely via a web browser. So if you're on a device that's connected to the same network that's plugged into one of the network connections on the back here, you can get to that web interface and you can adjust any of the settings, including settings for your smart antennas. There's also a couple of questions here about the tuning bands, as we talked about. You know, can we set multiple tuning bands at the same time? So the tuning band is really determined by the first filter that's on the antenna ports. And so that's what's limiting this tuning range. So it's a single tuning band. So for whatever number of channels you're deploying on a single Nexus receiver, they'll have to fall within that 24 meg tuning band. That's one of the reasons why we went to the SpectraBand tuning that does 470 to 1525. So you've got any legal frequency in your country in that range to select from, and you're going to try to find one where you have roughly 24 meg worth of open spectrum to place your mics in. And given that with 400K spacing, if you were to just stack them up, we don't recommend doing this, but if you were to just stack up all the frequencies 400K apart, you could fit 16 channels in 7 meg. And so having 24 meg gives you that flexibility to space them out, do your intermod coordination, but still do that band planning that we've talked about, where you're able to place your mics in a particular area of spectrum and then put your other devices like IFBs and camera hops or avoid local DTV, put that all somewhere else.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about these 3 ports here. We have 2 RJ45s and an SFP slot here. So these are our 3 network connection ports, and they can be used for Dante audio over IP, 16 channels in, 16 channels out. So, you know, if you had 16 receive channels all receiving, they would be transmitted via Dante out to on channels 1 through 16 on your Dante, and so it could be fed to anywhere on the Dante network. 16 channels in, as we just described as well, can be used as well to bring comms and IFB feeds back out and convert it to analog or AES on the D subs. Not only is these support Dante, but they also support control over IP. And as Gary mentioned just before, there's a web server built into the Nexus. You can basically log in to the Nexus from any web browser running on a phone, a tablet, or a PC, essentially from anywhere in the world. Because, if you had a VPN connection, then you can just log in from anywhere. The other important thing here is on Dante, on the port 1 over here, we also provide PoE, powering over Ethernet. Gary, do you want to talk some more about that?
Sure. So that's PoE plus in. This would be power from either a network switch or a power injector that's in line between your network switch and the port on the Nexus. PoE plus is 30 watts of power. Maximum power draw on a A20-Nexus is around 24 watts. It's usually quite a bit less than that, but if you're fully loaded doing everything, that we're just, that's why it's PoE plus, is because you could pull up to 24 watts.
Yeah, I think typically without all the Ethernet and Dante going, you're looking around like about 11, 12 watts, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So what this allows you to do is to power the unit remotely. So if you set this up, let's say on set, and then just ran a single piece of Cat5 or Cat6 cable back to wherever your mixer recorder was set up, you could send the audio via Dante. You could have control via the web interface, and you could power it via PoE plus, all with that one cable.
Yep, that's awesome. And then we have go on, carry on.
Oh, sorry, just a couple of keeping up with the Q&A going on here. Will the auto recall function that you were showing before, will that happen with just 2 tuning bands, or is it any of the tuning bands? So this is something that the auto recall, really what we should say is that it just remembers the frequencies that you've assigned in the different tuning bands after you've powered the unit up. So if you need to save settings and then have those recalled after you've power cycled your A20-Nexus, like make sure to save them into a quick settings file. But if you do have just a, whatever number of tuning bands you want, but if you have a few tuning bands that you want to set up a main and a backup or 2 backups, you can do that with this, automatic frequency memory function.
Yeah, but it will essentially remember all the frequencies across all tuning bands.
Right, but it doesn't maintain that through a power up is the thing that we want to make sure people remember. But the other question here, is it possible to send Dante signals out the DB25 or a way to input external audio signals, the Nexus and the Dante network as well? Yes, so the Dante connection is 16 channels in and out. So you can send a Dante audio from some other device on your Dante network. Like let's say you've got a Scorpio mixer recorder. You can put audio onto the Dante network from the Scorpio, and then you can pull audio off at the Nexus and feed it out the DB25, either line out or AAS digital out.
Yeah, so that's really useful for things like IFB feeds, comms, voice of God, all of those applications. You just set up the routing from your mixer recorder and just send it over Dante and do what you need to do with it there.
Yeah, we've got another question about frequency coordination and what the frequency coordination functions are going to be. Like I said, that's something that we've said is coming soon. So when that new firmware comes out that allows auto assign and frequency coordination, we'll talk a little bit more about those functions.
Right. Okay. One last thing I think on the networking side is the SFP. I mean, we're talking about being able to remote this box, hundreds of meters away, but if it needs to be kilometers away, we have SFP. Gary?
Yeah, so I'll show you on my camera view over here, since some of these folks are going to see my camera view. It's going to be a little bit out of focus, but this is an SFP, and this would go in the SFP port that Paul is pointing out to you. That there's a number of different options. This is sort of a standard piece of network hardware, a small form factor pluggable device, and you can buy all sorts of different SFPs. You could even get ones that have a RJ45 jack on it if you need a third copper network port. But the most common application here is going to be to install some sort of fiber optic adapter so that you could run fiber optic cable to get your network to a Nexus. On a copper network, your distance limitation is 100 meters. And so, a little more than 300 feet. So if you're further than that from your Nexus, you can just run fiber optic cable. And if you run fiber with the proper SFP, you can be kilometers away from your Nexus and get the Dante and the control signal back. And I think, as Paul mentioned, these network ports are switchable, so you can have it send the combined Dante and control signals. Or if you're in a network environment where you want to run Dante on one network and control on another one, you can separate them. But in terms of this SFP, I think typically run Dante and control on the same network connection. And then all you need to do is power locally via the TA4s on the back of the Nexus. And once you've got local power and you've got fiber optic network, you're all set to remote at a very great distance.
Right. Are you still seeing my back panel here, Gary?
Yeah, as long as you're talking, we're seeing your back panel.
Right. Yes. So I've just switched the Nexus front panel to the network menu there, so you can see the various settings you can make and how to configure the ports from here.
Paul, can you pull the cap off the SFP just so they can see what the SFP cage looks like? It's just a small slot in the back of the Nexus.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so if you wanted to segregate your Dante from your control, you do that using the port configuration menu here. And notice there's this setting for the A20-Nexus name. If you had multiple of these Nexuses on a network, you can give them discrete names like stage 1, stage 2, or what have you. And those names would appear in Dante controller, so you could see which one you're routing to wherever. And it would also show you that name in the web app too. So it's a useful feature. And this is where you set up your IP settings. They're both currently set to DHCP, so that's obviously the easiest way of doing things. Let's move on. Let's have a look. So we've got our 2.4 gigahertz SMA connectors here for the NextLink control. And that's true diversity as well. We spoke about diversity a little bit earlier, how that gives even better, more robust range. And yeah, our tests have shown that the NextLink range far exceeds the wireless audio transmission link. And Gary, why don't you talk about that? Or have you already done that? Talked about your experience last week at the sporting venue.
Oh, sure. So we went to a local basketball arena here near the Sound Devices Madison office. And we were there during a basketball game where they had, full crowd in the arena. So you've got people connecting to Wi-Fi, you've got lots of devices with Bluetooth running, and we were able to walk around the arena, and you would lose your Bluetooth connection, I think, after 20 meters or so, as you'd expect. And then we maintained the NextLink connection all the way around the arena, even in the concourse. So there's concrete walls between us and where the Nexus was set up, and down at the lower levels of the arena and throughout the entire space. So I think doing that sort of a test in a congested 2.4 gigahertz environment makes us pretty confident to say that that NextLink data link is going to continue to maintain a connection to an A20 Mini long after the audio is gone.
Yeah, great. Let's moving on here. There's a BNC input here. This is for connecting external timecode or word clock signals. And the reason for that is any timecode that's connected here will be synced to any transmitters that are in record only or record plus RF mode. Now, of course, in the US, record and simultaneous transmission is not allowed, but everywhere else in the world it is. But if you're in record only mode as well, the timecode that's plugged in here will automatically be synced with your transmitters, which is particularly useful if you want to, you're out of range. Your forward link is out of range, so you want to go into record mode, you can do that. Then you can bring all the recorded files into our free utility, Mac and PC utility called SD utility, which can then merge those, merge and sync those individual recordings on each transmitter into a poly file, which it can be delivered to post, and they'll be very happy with you because you've saved them a lot of work.
And Paul, is it right that you could take the file from your 8 series and put that into the utility as well, and then it'll trim out all of the audio that was recorded to like an A20 Mini while you weren't recording on the 8 series, and it will just assemble the file while you were rolling on the 8 series also?
That's correct, exactly correct. So you can import one of the 8 series sound report files. your typical sound report file, which is a CSV file. You can import that into SD utility, and basically that will be used to conform the exact audio data out of all those individual transmitter audio files before merging into a poly file. So essentially you end up with identical files in length and time code and metadata as what you have on your 8 series. So that makes it very easy for posts to wrangle.
That's great. Yeah, and on my setup here, you can see I've got a 888 with a Nexus docked on it using the Quick Dock accessory. And I'm actually showing you the time code view on here that's going to tell you the time that it's getting from the 8 series and show the frame rate. I can pop out of here, back to the main menu, and you can see that's also shown right by the time code symbol here. So we're able to take time code from an 8 series or take time code in from the back on that BNC that Paul showed you. And the Nexus itself doesn't hold time code, but what it does is it'll send that time code via the Next link out to an A20 mini transmitter, and then that A20 mini will sync to that time code. And as we mentioned before, the A20 mini's got a very accurate internal clock, and so it's able to hold time code throughout it, an entire day and with very little drift. And so
even when powered down, so if you go off for lunch, it will hold that time code for about 4 hours. So
yeah.
So what that means is once you plug in that BNC or hook up to your 8 series at the beginning of the day, you don't need to do anything. It's any transmitters that are paired, they're just going to auto sync. You have nothing to do. It'll do it all for you. And
Well, can you talk?
Go on, carry on.
Oh, I was going to ask if you could talk a little bit just about, we're on this main menu. There's the various options for channel views and RTSA and the TX list. Maybe just next thing you want to do is run them through that view.
Yeah. Should we go through the remaining ports here?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so while we're on the rip. So yeah, we've got our DC inputs, 2 TA4 ports. So you've got one for redundancy there. So the unit can be powered via either of these TA4s or from PoE, PoE plus. And that goes from 10 to 18 volts. And then we have also 2 DC outs here. And you've got a total amount of current delivery of 500 milliamps there. So if you're running in at 12 volts on your TA4, you've got about 6 watts of power available to power your IFB or camera hop transmitters or whatever other device you've got connected there.
And the TA4 inputs are highest voltage takes precedence. So
that's correct.
You can have a redundant power setup if you want.
Yeah. And then we have the USB-A port here, which is multi-purpose. Its main purpose is when you first get your Nexus out of the box and you want to pair your transmitters, you just connect your A20 minis from their USB-C port to this USB-A port, and they will automatically pair to the Nexus in this, what we call the TX list down here. So I'm going to just go into there, and you can see that I've got 3 transmitters here, A20 minis, that I've plugged in via USB-C to USB-A, and they basically automatically pair within a second or two. And this sort of gives an overview of if they're mapped to a receiver channel. In this particular case, they are mapped. I don't have to actually map them to anything. So if I had a whole inventory of, say, about 20 transmitters, I could bring them into this list, but unmap them to a channel so they're not actually being used on a particular production. So you can think of it as just your inventory, which you can go into and choose which transmitters you want to use for a particular day's work or particular production. And it shows you the serial number here and whether they're actually connected via NextLink. So that's our TX list, but think of it as an inventory. There's also a button here if you want to unpair a transmitter. Why would you want to unpair? Well, if you've got maybe multiple Nexuses, Nexi, as we call them, then because a NextLink is basically, you can only have one receiver control one transmitter. You would want, if you wanted to control a transmitter from a different Nexus, you'd have to unpair it from the first Nexus and then pair it with the second one and then control it from there.
We had one question come in as you were talking about those DC outputs on the back panel.
Okay.
So the DC outputs, the question is, when you're powering via PoE, can you use the DC outputs? And yes, you can. There's just less power available. You have to think about your total power budget. And as we said, if the Nexus is drawing something between maybe 11 and 15 watts, and your total power draw can be up to, let's say, 24. Like how much power is there left for the output? And when you're outpowered via PoE, the DC outs are going to be 12 volt.
Right. Okay. So you can see from the TX list, it's very easy to remap channels as well. I can just click that box and then select another channel here. I don't know if you can see that with my arm in the way. So I can remap here if I want to. Very quick thing to do. You've got a couple of other options here just to see information about your transmitter that's connected, like serial number, firmware, model, etc. And then you've got like a global TX settings list where you can have the interface ask you to confirm whether you want to power off a transmitter or stop recording. It's just a bit of safety there for you. Okay, let's I think that wraps up.
Yeah,
oh,
one
few
more
other things
question.
Go on, carry on.
One more question we had come in was, can you transmit audio from a single transmitter to multiple A20-Nexus receivers at the same time? And yes, you can. I mean,
Yes.
when we're talking about this pairing function, we're only talking about the NextLink data control. So the NextLink data is the thing that's, where you have to have one-to-one receiver to transmitter. As with any of our receivers, you can absolutely receive it from as many as you want. The A20 mini transmitter in this case is going to be broadcasting that audio signal, and you can pick it up from an A10 RX and A20 RX with 2 or 3 different Nexus receivers if you needed to. So that still works the way you expect, but just only one of these Nexus receivers will be talking to the transmitter via the NextLink. And then if you do change settings, like let's say you change the frequency from the linked Nexus, you would then need to go manually change the frequency on any other receivers that are receiving that transmission.
Yeah. So just wrapping up the USB-A a little bit here. The other functionality is you can plug in a USB thumb drive and you can save your setup files and load setup files from that. You can plug in a USB keyboard there if you want to use a keyboard for naming your receiver channels or any other naming function. This does support USB hubs, but it's limited to, I think it's half an amp. So 2.5 watts on that. So if you've got power hungry USB devices, you want to use a powered hub.
Yeah, that's right. That USB-A is 500 milliamp at 5 volt
right.
for power. So depending on what you're plugging into the hub, you might need a powered hub.
Right. Okay, we can now go to the menus as you requested before. Is that good time to do that?
Sure. Yeah. Last thing I had a question about, just to clarify with the pairing. Can you unpair and still receive audio? Yes, unpairing will just unpair the NextLink data link, but it won't change the audio settings. But then if you do expect the audio settings to follow along with the receiver, you would need to repair it.
Yeah, the term pairing and unpairing just totally refers to just the NextLink control. It has nothing to do with the actual audio transmission. Just to clarify that. All right, so let's just go back to the main menu here. And this thing is very, very easy to navigate. Yes, there's a 70-page user guide online. If you really want to get into the weeds and find out every detail about this product, please do. But you'll find this product very easy to navigate. So the first screen here in the main menu is giving us shortcuts essentially to the different receiver views. So here's the 8-channel view. If I go back, here's the 1-channel view, the last 1-channel view you looked at. And if I would go to the 4-channel view, you can see there that if I'm on the 8-channel view, there's a shortcut to get to 4-channel view just by tapping the 2 screens. And then you can bank between the different groups of receivers that way. Now, obviously, if you have the 16 channels enabled with the 2+4 plugins, or 12 channels enabled, you'll get other options here which will allow you to shortcut to like looking at all 16 channels at once or all 12 channels at once. That's all possible. And notice that in any of these views, you can choose to, on the last screen, choose to display the real-time spectrum analyzer there as well. So that's quite a nice view, especially if you're only using 6 transmitters or what have you. You can see all of that in real time. Okay. Let's go back to the main menu here. First menu, second OLED screen here. This is our RTSA, which we've been through already, and you can access the scanner from there too. And then we have the TX list, which we've just demonstrated. And then we have the RF menu, which I showed just a little bit earlier in terms of setting rear or front and setting up whether you're working with smart antennas or powered or active antennas and what have you there. You can change your tuning bands from here too. And this is something we haven't spoken about yet, but we have these RF history plots, which you can see in any of the views, but you can set the duration of the history and what that history plot is showing, whether it's Q meter history or RSSI. So let's just go and then you can see an example here. So here it is just here. If I was to turn off this particular transmitter, you can see now that we've got no signal coming in, nothing on the RSSI, nothing on the Q plot here. Okay, so that's really useful for seeing, you know, if you heard a dropout on your headphones and you want to know which transmitter was that, whereas that you could take a look at your Q. And actually the best thing to do would be to look at it on your 8-channel view, because we can see all 8 at the same time. You'd have a very good idea of which channel was causing the problem. Okay. And yeah, you can set those RF history plots all the way up to 10 minutes in duration. So if you're doing a long walk test, ideal for that.
Paul, we had one question come in about the 12 and 16 channel plugins. That's so as it ships, the Nexus is an 8-channel receiver. And what we've said about the 12 and 16 channel operation is that that's going to be in a future firmware update. So we expect that sometime early next year.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. We've already looked at our audio output menu here, where you can select what you want to be on your 2D sub outputs, whether it's receiver as receiver signals as analog or AAS. Remember, the receivers are always permanently mapped to your 16 channels of Dante out. So you can have Dante out and analog and AAS going at the same time. That doesn't have to be one or the other. And then you can choose what you're monitoring in your headphones via the front panel 3.5mm headphone output. So there's various options there for mono or stereo. When you're in a 1RX view like this, it's going to actually solo that particular channel you're looking at, which is obviously what you see is what you get. Moving on, here's our power menu. Not a lot in there really. This allows you to enable those DC outs we were just talking about here. And you can have the unit automatically turn on when power is connected to your Nexus. Okay. Timecode menu, Gary showed you earlier. Just a little note here that when all your transmitters are synced, it tells you up here. Nexus knows about that. Network menu we've had a look at. Pretty obvious stuff. Quick setup we've had a look at. And then we've got the system menu, which is one part of the product we haven't been into at all yet. This is just system-wide controls like brightness of the screen, screensaver. You can actually lock out the whole front panel so no one comes along and changes your settings either intentionally or inadvertently. So you can set the unit so that none of the front panel controls work, and there's like a secret button press to get out of that. But
and that's obviously very helpful if you're controlling it remotely and have it out on
especially set. Yeah. This is your country setting, so this should be actually, Gary, do you want to talk a little bit more about the country here, please?
Sure. So I'll do the same thing on my Nexus setup here. So I'm going to go into system settings and you'll see the country there. So the important thing to know is, because this is a global product, we give you all the different country options, but your transmitters, you have to set your A20 mini transmitter country using the A20 remote app. And that's intentional because the A20 remote app has location services. So it'll verify that the country that you're trying to set is indeed the country that you're located in. So you're following all the local regulations. And then the country data is reported to the Nexus. And so the country needs to match up between your A20 minis and your Nexus. If it doesn't match, you'll get a mismatch error, but you're not able to set the country from the Nexus, and that's intentional so that you can't accidentally transmit on any illegal frequency ranges.
Great. Okay, so yeah, that's the country setting right there. Then you can set up the date and time of the unit and what time zone you're in, all of that sort of stuff. This is where you can format the USB thumb drive that you connect to your USB-A port on the rear. This is where you can do your firmware updates, and there's a second screen by touching more. When you touch more, it will tell you which page you're on, right? Currently 2 of 2. And here you can decide how your next link is going to work. Are we pushing settings from Nexus to the transmitter, which is probably the most common setting that people will want, or do you want to actually pull the settings from the transmitters, or do you want to set it manually? So you can set that there. When it comes to installing plugins, you have the plugins menu here, which you can use to see what plugins you already have installed or to install plugins. We're going to talk more about the web app in a minute, but if you want to put a level of security on access to the web app control, you can do that from here. Various regulatory stuff, firmware, ident, and all that sort of stuff. So that's really the menus. It's very easy to find your way around.
Yeah, Paul, that's probably a good segue. Are you okay if I go into showing the web app?
Yeah, have you got that set up? Or
I do, yeah.
I'll go for it.
So let me show you here. You should all be able to see the web app, and this is just running in Google Chrome on my laptop, but this could run in any web browser on any device on the network. So we had a question come in about, if, is there going to be an app for tablet? And really, there's not going to be an app for Nexus beyond just the web app. So any device that runs a web browser, which could be, your desktop PC, laptop PC, phone, tablet, anything, you can connect to it. I think we're going to see a lot of people using like these little travel routers for, sort of portable work, where you can just plug in a small
here's one
Wi-Fi access point. Yeah.
GINet.
Yeah. The GLINet ones are nice, and they're USB powered and don't take too much power to set up a Wi-Fi network. So you can just plug that into the wired network port on the back of your unit, and you're off and running any device that you want to connect to the network. And so you can see here, I just typed in the IP address that I had set up for my control network.
Yeah, so we should just say you'd go into your network menu on the Nexus, and the actual IP address that you need to type in is shown in the screen there. Then you just tap that into your browser, and away you go.
Sure. Yeah. So if you're looking at my camera, I've got the network up. But yeah, so the screen share is showing you the web interface. So we're just looking at the web page here, top of the web page. You've got your various options to where do I want to go for, do I want to go into the RTSA? I can bring up the RTSA screen. Do I want to look at my home screen, which shows me my different channel views? I can, with the little X on the side here, if there's channels I'm not using, I can just collapse it down, or I can expand it out. You can tap into any single channel that you want, and you can get the single channel view, which again, we're just emulating all of the controls that you saw Paul show on the front panel. So I can adjust my RF power from here. I can adjust my modulation settings. I can set it into record mode. Sure.
Actually, Gary, because you're mounted on an 8 series, you're not seeing all the possibilities of the standalone mode. So I just want to show you something there.
Sure.
Let's see. Just see if I can bring my... So I'm going to stop your screen sharing.
I'll stop it. Go ahead.
And then hopefully you'll see my screen now. Are you seeing that?
Yep, I see.
Yep. Okay, so I'm looking at my 3 transmitters here, but let's just tap into one of these, the 1RX, and you can see some, because my Nexus is standalone and not connected to the 8 series, the gain forward type controls are shown. When you're on an 8 series, it automatically transfers those gain forward controls to the trim and settings on your 8 series. But the really nice thing about this is, if I want to adjust the gain, remember, I just want to say here, we're not adjusting the gain on the transmitter here. This is the actual gain on the actual receiver itself. All right, so but you can set that up for all your channels and can just go between each one, quickly setting the levels, and so you can see all these shortcuts to the various transmitters back here as well. Okay, back to you, Gary. I'll stop sharing.
All right. Let's see. So you're back to, you can see my transmitter 2 now?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, so the bottom part of the single channel view will change depending on if you're docked, and some of those functions are on 8 series, or if you're running in a standalone mode. You've got the gear icon up here where you can change the settings that you're used to changing from your A20 remote app, like auto power on with lav, resume record on powering on, etc. You've got your power on off, and these are all going to work the same way. So let's say I wanted to mute this transmitter, and I just click mute from here, and I see that same spinning icon. You can see very quickly it mutes. It'll stop spinning around the on or off as soon as it receives an acknowledgement via the next link that the command has been performed. So this is true feedback from the device saying, yep, it's muted, or no, it's not muted. And again, same functions that you're used to from the A20 remote app. But the other really cool thing in here is running the RTSA remotely. So I could be, again, anywhere on the same network. As Paul said, if you have a VPN connection, this could potentially be anywhere in the world. And you can see the real-time scan of where these microphones are operating. And the same thing, if I had some interference, and let's say I needed to move transmitter number 2, I can just click on that up in the upper part of the web interface, and I can even drag it around and say, okay, I want to move the frequency over to this new frequency, 561.25. And if I click assign, it'll say, which transmitter do you want to assign it to? All right, if I want to do this on number 2, that just goes away on its old frequency and comes back up on the new frequency. And so we're doing that remotely from the web interface, which I think is going to be
beautiful,
really, really powerful for people. Yeah, it's great. Now from here, you also have the option to save this trace. So this will export both a PNG image of the frequency scan and also a CSV file in case you wanted to import the scan into some frequency coordination software, maybe IAS or Wireless Workbench, Wireless Designer, whatever you're using to do your full frequency coordination. If you're doing a high channel count kind of setup, you can bring that CSV file into it. Another question coming in on the Q&A is, can you power the GL-iNet router you showed from the USB port on the back of the Nexus?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a qualified yes, because the GL-iNet will tell you that that Slate router pulls more than 500 milliamps worth of USB power. So your mileage may vary. It might be a better idea to use the 12 volt output and just get a 12 volt to 5 volt DC to DC converter for the GL-iNet router if you do choose you want to power it off of the Nexus. But I know Paul's tried it, and it does work off the USB
very
port,
solidly. Or if you're docked to an 8 series, you can actually use the USB-A port on your 8 series, which can deliver up to 1.5 amps. So
yeah, if you're docked on the 8 series, I definitely use the USB-A on the 8 series.
Yeah.
All right.
What else we've got there? You've got all your tabs along the top there for doing other various menu settings. So
same thing here. You can see from the RTSA, just like Paul showed you on the Nexus. If I hover over the number for the channel here, if I hover over the number for channel 2 and tap into it, it just takes me directly to that channel. So it's really fast navigation between those things, and you can get into all the rest of the settings that we looked at before, like RF settings, to turn bias power on and off. Do I want to control, where do I want the antennas to come from, the front or the rear? We've had some questions just in general from users about antenna switching. And yeah, you could, if you needed to, you could have 2 sets of antennas plugged into a Nexus. Let's say you've got it set up remotely and you've got talent moving between 2 main areas. You could plug them into the 2 sets of antenna ports here and just switch between if you needed to. It's not like a multi-zone where they're all 4 antennas active at the same time, but it does switch your A and B antennas between the front and the rear. So you could use it for a simple A-B switch there, or a zone 1, zone 2 switch, I should say, for your A and B antennas. Also security, we talked about before. You can lock out the front panel if this is operating remotely and you don't want anybody messing with it. And you can set a password here as well. The password is, if you're on a network that maybe isn't just your network and you're worried about someone else remotely accessing the Nexus web interface and changing settings, you can password protect the web interface. what else do we want to talk about, Paul?
Well, I don't know. I think we've talked enough.
All right. So if you've
let's-
got questions left, please throw them into the Q&A. And we've been here for a bit over an hour now. And so,
yeah.
well, happy to answer any questions you guys still have. One thing I want to do when we're just about ready to finish up is I do want to show the quick dock. I'll power down my 8 series and I'll undock my
Okay.
Nexus and show you that quickly.
Yeah, it might be good to show how quickly it is to remove that and reinstall it. But
Yeah.
here is the actual quick dock accessory that you'd purchase, and it shows the sort of quick release mechanism just here. Got 2 levers which you squeeze to lift off the 8 series, but Gary can demonstrate that now, hopefully.
Yeah, I'll show you that. We've got a question about can you use an antenna with a multi-zone antenna distro? And yeah, absolutely you could. So if you had something, like a professional wireless systems multi-zone antenna distribution system, or Wizicom makes the MAT288, or there's a number of products that do multi-zone where you can have 4 or 8 zones of antennas plugged in, and then that distributes them out to receivers with your traditional A and B diversity receive in. So it's compatible with that. As we're talking to users about any RF accessories with the Nexus, the big thing you want to think about is the which tuning bands you're going to use, because generally speaking, the RF accessories you're buying won't operate the full 470 to 1525 range that the Nexus does. So your RF distribution, maybe your antennas that you're using, any of those things may be limiting the frequency range that you're able to operate in. So just think about that as you're designing your system.
Have we mentioned the Monarch yet? I don't think we did we?
Oh yeah, show them the Monarch.
There's the Monarch. So with every Nexus, you get 2 of these bow tie antennas. They're omni, and they cover the full 470 to 1525 spectrum. So
yeah, the Monarch is obviously a kind of a butterfly shaped antenna, and Paul's showing it in the orientation that you'd actually operate it in, where the back of the antenna with the BNC connector is going to be sort of facing your bag, or facing your stand, and then the other end of the antenna is sort of the forward direction. And in that orientation, it's omnidirectional pattern horizontally. You can see a little vertical. Can you show them the vertical
marking?
Yeah. So it just shows you how to set the antenna up vertically. Another question that came in was the dock connector. Is it rated for multiple docks and undocks? Yes. I mean, this is a connector that's intended to mate and disconnect.
But just don't do it live. You need to turn power off. We wouldn't recommend.
Right. Yeah. Don't hot plug it. There's some small chance that the pins don't connect in the proper sequence, and that it could cause you some problems. So it's just always best practice to power off before undocking, which I mean, that's something you'd be doing anyway, because you're maybe moving this from your cart to your bag or something like that. And that's something else to think about with these Nexus receivers. And I've seen people who have setups where they have a full set of receivers on a cart, and then a duplicate set of receivers in a bag, maybe rack mount receivers on a cart, slot receivers in the bag. Being able to move the Nexus quickly between those 2 locations, it's pretty powerful. I mean, it could save you from having to buy extra receivers. So, yeah. Anything else we want to? Let's see. I think that's about it for Q&A.
Yeah, just a couple of other accessories. There's the A20 shelf, optional shelf, which is a 1U rack where you could basically fit 2 Nexuses in, or a Nexus side by side with a power station 8M, which is the box that we use for charging up to 8 A20 mini transmitters. So that's available too. The Monarchs available. You don't have, they can be bought individually as bow tie antennas if you want to, and they can be used with any products you like. What else is there? There's the brackets, the 2.4 gig antenna brackets, Gary, which
you can see that on my setup. I have the brackets mounted to the side of my Nexus, and so that's bringing the 2.4 gig antennas to the front panel. So this is probably going to be useful for people who are in a bag setup, and they have the Monarch antennas connected remotely, and then you've got the NextLink antennas just coming out the top of the bag.
Great. Well, I think if we've got no more questions, we should say goodbye.
Yeah,
And thanks for listening to us. And
yeah, let me do this doc real quickly,
Oh,
just
yeah, I
so
forgot
you
about
can see it. So we'll bring it over to my camera. So there's a little latch on the front here that latches onto a post. And then once you've moved the latch off the post, you'll power the whole system down. And then, as we say, quick dock. So you literally just pinch the connector together here. And that's it. It just lifts right off. And so from here, you could take it, disconnect any of your rear panel connections and move it on to another location.
Perfect.
A question about 2.4 gig antennas. Yeah, certainly there are other 2.4 gig antennas out there. From a compliance standpoint, we are recommending that you use the included antennas.
Yeah, and they will give excellent range. So
yep. If you run into any problem with NextLink range, please just reach out to me and we can talk. Because so far, the NextLink range is so much farther than your audio range. I'd be surprised if people run into a situation where they need to try and, remote those NextLink antennas closer to talent.
Okay, phenomenal. Thanks. I want to go ahead. No problem. Okay, if there's no more questions, we'd just like to say thanks, Gary, for doing this with me, and thanks everyone out there for bearing with us while we went through that obviously quite detailed way. I'm not quite sure if we intended to do that, but I think it's good to get this will be posted online, this video. So if you want to go back to it, you can. Obviously, we mentioned just before, there's a full user guide available already on the website. There's an FAQ, which goes into some more of the nuances of the product, and there's various information on the web. So please look there, and obviously speak to your dealer, or you can speak to our tech support team or anyone associated with Sound Devices for more information. We're very happy to take your call and discuss your particular workflows with you.
Yeah, the Nexus is shipping to dealers. I've been talking to some users who are previewing them at dealers today, where they've just been landing. Some of the first units have been getting to dealers today. Let's see. Oh, we got one more last question coming in. When it's docked to an 8 series mixer, are there other connections that need to be made besides the expansion port? So the expansion port provides power, and it provides the audio connection between the two units. And then, as we showed you, it'll send time code from the 8 series up to the Nexus. But then anything else, like the NextLink antennas, the Monarch antennas for the audio link, the antennas will still connect into your Nexus. And if you're using the control network would also connect into the Nexus, even when it's docked.
And it should be stated that when the Nexus is docked to an 8 series, all the user interfacing with the Nexus is done from the Nexus's 4 OLED screens. There's no control of the Nexus itself from the 8 series.
Yeah, I mean, with something like an A20RX, it's nice to have the integration on 8 series where you can bring up the A20RX controls on a nice color touchscreen. But with the color OLEDs on a Nexus, I think integrating that in with your 8 series really wouldn't gain you anything.
All right, gone. All right, everybody. Thanks again for listening to us, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.